welcome you to our second panel discussion of the 2015 Upton Forum. In a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce our moderator, who is coming to us via Skype from his home in Taipei, Taiwan. And we will try to ignore the message that just showed up on the screen. So one moment. So let me begin by introducing our 2015 Upton Scholar, Professor Yasheng Huang. Professor Huang. I will next introduce our moderator, who will in turn introduce our three speakers tonight. Our moderator, Phee Boon Kang, is a Beloit College Trustee and alumnus. He's the founder and president of Boon Associates, a consulting firm serving the financial services sector in Taiwan, China, and Japan. He is currently an external director in Citibank Japan Limited. He also, quite fittingly for this panel on entrepreneurship, has a long history as an entrepreneur, as he terms himself, during a 30-year banking career in retail banking in Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Malaysia for Citibank and Bank of America. He also helped found the Jane Goodall Institute in Taiwan, and then followed by founding and leading the Jane Goodall Institute Global. I know of no other person who I have learned more from about Asian economies than Phee Boon Kang. So let me turn it over to you, Boon.
Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be able to join you from a distance. I wish I could be in the room. I know it would be a lot more productive and a lot more fun. But please bear with me while I had the fantastic support from Professor Palmer in making sure that this particular event will go all right, even though I'm moderating from afar. My fellow trustees, Don Wyatt, on Tuesday night, noted the auspicious number 8, that Beloit College is holding the Upton Forum for the 8th consecutive year. And guess what? Since 2008. Professor Huang, in his commentary, remarked that night about the craze of making money in China. You see, the number 8, or bar, is a homonym to the Chinese character far, which is too exciting a word for many Chinese around the world, including of late, many young people, like we have Chufa for startup or for getting set on to begin a journey. Bao Fa, like exploding. Fa Chai, like making money. Fa Da, like flourishing. Fa Xian, like discovering. Fa Ning, like inventing. So you got the picture of the importance of the number 8. Well, no wonder the overseas Chinese diaspora who left China to make ends meet or escape from natural and man-made disasters from their homeland have been noted for their singular success in commerce. And also no wonder the Greater China region has had an awesome period of economic development since I left Beloit in 1973. This was led by Hong Kong and Taiwan, then culminating in the fabulous mainland China's economic growth after Deng Xiaoping started the economic liberalization in 1992. In this context, Tuesday night's forum was all about Beloit's passionate liberal arts scene. We were reminded 2 nights ago in the most eclectic way about other more important things in life than making money. Tonight, we have another treat in store. We now have a group of alumni in the room who will be sharing their personal adventures after Beloit College. It is about liberal arts in practice. It is about their life stories after the famous Beloit field terms. That was the term we used during the Beloit Plan era in the 1960s and 70s. And their adventures, as you will find out tonight, continue this very day. So it is a live case that they are sharing with you. As a trustee, it is my hope that the students attending this event tonight will be among those who can come back to our campus to share their success stories, like the speakers here, and to give back to Beloit College. Now about the participants. I met all 3 of them at the dinner in Shanghai back in 2012 when we welcomed President Scott Beer to China. Our 3 participants have all been involved in startups, and all 3 are currently still working on their dreams to make them come through. As Warren had mentioned, I have been involved in startups inside 2 multinational banks. That is, of course, a timid comparison because there was no money problem for me. I just had to do it, execute, and that everything else will follow. You will learn later that startups are not like that. They can be very, very tough. Our first speaker, Chen Ying, when he was in his junior year, he was an exchange student at Beloit. He later shared with many of us that was a transforming year for him, and that put him on track to where he is today. He essentially completed a major in economics at Beloit College by taking 10 economic classes in 2 semesters. The economic department awarded him the top prize given each year to the most academically outstanding major. After Beloit, he worked for Bain & Company and later, in succession, Bain Capital, a PE firm, for 5 years in total. Then he went back to the Harvard Business School to get his MBA and was named an Echo Green Fellow. At Harvard, Ying was the co-founder of the China Entrepreneurship Club and the co-leader of the MBA Oath campaign. Currently, he is the founder and CEO of a firm working to transform retail distribution in China's countryside and small towns. Now about the second speaker, Tony. I met him first when he was a student, when I went to Beloit for the Asian Century Conference. After Beloit, he joined Z-Band Advisors in Shanghai as his employee, guess what? Number 8. A great startup experience for him because Z-Band was a new company. He has been involved in research on asset management and consulting projects for global clients. Today, Tony is still with the same company, Z-Band Advisors, where he is the executive director who has moved to New York City to sort of plant a new outpost to expand his company's activities. Tony will bring you up to date during his talk on the further reforms needed for the next quarter century in China, which is to reallocate resources from the state-owned enterprises, basically, to the super competitive but cash-starved private sector. Last but not least, we have an amazing speaker who hails from Shanghai, Eddie Tang. The Tang family has a long and unique history connecting China with Beloit. For our speaker, Eddie is a third generation Beloiter, and his son is currently a Beloit College student. I hope he is in the room tonight. We call 四代同堂 in China, but this 四代同校, 4 generations at the same college. His great-grandfather, by the way, Tang Wenzhi, was a co-founder and then later president of Jiao Tong University in Shanghai. Eddie's grandfather, C.Y. Tang, was the first Chinese student to attend Beloit College. Eddie's father, Edward, graduated from Beloit College in 1949. That was a very tumultuous time. Those of you who have been following the cross-streets issues closely will understand that. And Eddie, after Beloit, received his PhD in chemistry from Iowa State University in 1990. He has worked for Intel in both the US and in Shanghai. And before starting up his current company, he had also worked for Applied Materials. I will let Eddie describe his company to you, so I will not elaborate that. He actually has 2 startup companies. The first one, he's no longer involved actively in management, and the second one, he's working harder to get new traction. Eddie, by the way, is an inventor with many patents registered on devices and methods in the industry that he is fond of. So, without further ado, let's now begin with Ying, followed by Tony, and then Eddie. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Boon.
Okay. So my dear fellow Beloit classmates and my dearest professors, I just want to give a little bit sharing of my own experiences to be an entrepreneur in China, to give a little bit background and some lessons from my own stories. So firstly, just a few words about myself. I think Boon has introduced me a little bit. So I was an exchange student at Beloit at 2004. My career before being an entrepreneur is consulting, investment, and I have MBA as well. I'm right now a founder CEO of an internet company that started in 2012. Before I go into the details of today's meet, I just want to say that that it all got my entrepreneurial story actually all comes back to here. I mean, to Beloit College. I think when I took the class from Professor Jerry Gustafson, like 12 years ago, I think that's my first intimate touch with what the entrepreneurship is really about and what we can do with ourselves and with our one little crazy life. And that thing has such a strong impact on me, and that actually navigates a lot of the later decisions in my life. So I just want to say a little bit thank you to all my professors at Beloit. So I want to make a statement first. Okay, everything I'm sharing today will be proven wrong someday, and this just shows how dynamic the whole entrepreneurial world is, and how uncertain the things we're doing as an entrepreneur can be. So just bear that in mind and try to prove me wrong someday. Maybe today it's also a good time to tell me that I'm not really telling everything as correct as it is. So just bear that in mind. I'll start by giving a little bit background of China's entrepreneurial landscape over the last 24 months. If you want to summarize the whole thing in one word, it's crazy. It has been a very crazy 18 to 24 months in China if you are starting a startup or you're an entrepreneur. Firstly, we have experienced 18 months of extremely exuberant capital market. There are billion-dollar companies that has been founded almost on a monthly basis. We'll hear stories of young people like in their 20s or 30s that raise millions or tens of millions, $20 million almost on a daily basis. And even I have quite a few friends that are able to build a company that is already worth $1 billion or more within 24 months' time. So it is a very crazy period of time. You will see the whole market, including the venture capitalists, including the entrepreneurs, everybody is really in a very anxious mood that they all want to do more to get bigger within such a very short period of time. And everybody is worried that tomorrow the market will be closed down and there will be no new capital into the market. So everybody is growing even faster and raising money at an even more crazy speed. And that kind of reminds you of what has happened in the United States around 1999, 2000. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but you kind of see that right now in China. And the second background is that you will see a lot of mergers and acquisitions of number one and number twos in China. What I mean by number one, number two is that it's not a simple or any kind of other acquisition. Is the top one of the market, which is usually accounts for like 50 to 60% of the market share, combines with the number two of the market, which usually accounts for 30-35% of the market share, and become a market dominance, which accounts for like 95% of the market share. That doesn't really happen in the United States, given we have all the antitrust thing. But in China, although we also have antitrust law, it's not the case in the internet market. Just give you a little bit of example. We have in the classifieds market. In the United States we use Craigslist, but in China we have two companies. One is called 58, and the other is called Ganji. Both of them similar size. One is number one, the other is number two. They merged, and they become like the dominant player of classifieds in China. We also see that in the car sharing business. We have Uber in the United States, and in China we have two companies. One is called Didi, which is like the sound of the taxi. The other is called Kuaidi, which means fast taxi. And they merged, and they become the largest car sharing company in the world in China, and presumably in the world, and worth also around more than $10 billion now. And also in the local service area, we have one company which is pretty much the similar model of Groupon in the U.S., and also another one which is like the Yelp of the U.S. They merged, and they become a $20 billion company as well. So you see a lot of crazy things like that. I think that partially thanks to a book that Peter Thiel wrote last year called 0 to 1, that kind of recommends the startups merge with each other to get a dominant position in the world. On the other hand, that also thanks to everybody's anxious, and they don't know whether they can get money to burn continuously in the market, so they all merge together. But the third one is, suddenly, probably 2 months ago, the market froze, meaning no capital is still available for the internet companies in China. And quite many companies went bankrupt or about to. Just to show you a personal experience of mine, last week I just interviewed a few people who just got out from a few internet companies which used to have 3,000 people 2 weeks ago, but now bankrupt. So that's how crazy the market has been now in China. The reason I share all of this is I think one thing remains to be true about entrepreneurship is that to build a successful company, no matter you're in the good days or the bad days, remains to be extremely difficult. And odds to be success remains to be extremely low. And you probably have a million different reasons to be successful, because for any of the success, luck accounts for a very large portion of the reason, and you have many different reasons to be lucky. But on the other hand, I do believe that the reasons for failure share patterns. And you can see that different companies or different founders fail for similar reasons. So today, for the major portion of my presentation, I'm going to talk about a few failure lessons that I feel are personally very poignant to you. It's primarily from the failure lessons of myself, but some of them are also from my peers. Failure, just give you a little bit background here. Failure doesn't necessarily mean you give up. Actually, in the entrepreneurial world, if the founder doesn't give up, it's never the end. Failure are the wrong decisions to make along the road. For example, we ourselves, are still a growing company. Have raised around $10 million over the last 3 years, but we have made a lot of mistakes. And here are just a few. Sorry.
Lower keyboard.
Lower keyboard.
This keyboard right here.
Oh. Okay, lesson 1, find a good thing to start. It sounds intuitive, right? We always want to do the right thing, the good thing, to start a business. But there's a few characters about what is a good thing. I think the first and the most important character is that it has to fit who you are. Because entrepreneurship is a very long journey. If you're only coming here for an opportunity, probably you're not going to stay long because there are so many challenges. And when you really dig into the business, you will find opportunity you think there is not there. So you got to find something that really fits either your passion, your experience, your expertise, your interest, something that has something to do with your dreams, something that can actually make you stick around for a longer time. So I think to start a business or to start a startup, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what type of person I am and what thing that actually fits myself. And second thing is that try to find yourself a big enough market. And my personal criteria for big enough market is that one day you potentially have 200 million potential users, not 200. So there's a big difference of that. 200 million potential users. So that's the criteria of how big a market could be. Okay. And the third thing is that you want to start by a very small, but a very clear need to address. Don't start by saying, I have 200 million users in the future. It's a huge market. I'm going to crack the market. I'm be a billion-dollar company. You have to start with a very, very, very small pain point that you can address today. So always start small with a small thing you can do today, and then expand from there. And the last one is that a good thing is much more than a good idea. Everybody has their opinions. Everybody has a lot of ideas. But a good thing is more than a good idea. It also means that you're ready, means you have the resources, expertise, and the readiness to carry on the good idea. That forms a good thing. So now it comes to my own failure lesson. What I have been wrong in this is that I started by something I'm passionate, which is to serve the rural areas and the base of the pyramid, the tier 3, tier 4 cities in China. But despite my passion, it is not a market that I'm very familiar with. So the reason I can stay this long in this path is because it's something that is actually really going to my heart. I'm passionate about it. I want to serve these people. I want to serve these consumers and make them more connected by the internet. But the other reason why I'm still suffering a lot or struggling a lot is that I'm not really familiar with those populations. It took a long time for me to put myself in their shoes and really understand what is a small but a clear pain points. That's why we're still pivoting, right? So you got to find something that you're passionate about and something you're familiar with. Preferably that you yourself is the user of that thing. That'll be a good starting point or find a good thing to start. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson is get partners right. Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. Because when you do it alone, well, there are very successful companies that are sole founders. For example, for the one that I'm doing right now, it's not successful enough. I'm the sole founder. That's one of the huge pain that I've been going through because you always need really cool people, really smart people to help you along the way. And partners, and as a startup, you don't expect yourself to hire really talented people at the very beginning because you're so small, it's very hard to sell your visions to others. So get a few partners that you're similar in values, but complementary in skills and personality. Usually when you get good partners, it will save you a lot of time to ramp up the business. Because one guy can be the sales, one guy can be the technology, and then you have someone who is doing operation, and the other just taking care of everything else, like HR and stuff. Then you get a team. When you have a team, everything just moves very quickly. So that's very important. One of the failure lessons I have, again, because I start by doing something in rural markets, and nobody wants to go rural because it's poor, it's difficult, and you don't have a lot of entertainment down there. I started by myself. Of course, I have a team, but there isn't really partner per se. So everything just grows much more slow. And even if you only transition to something else, it took a long while for yourself to think about it, think whether it's right or wrong. So it's very important to get the partners right. And another thing is that don't have a partner structure that everybody has the equal say. One has the final say. Very important. No group decisioning. Because in startup, time is very valuable. You can't just always be consensus driven. Execution is very important. So one has to have a final say. If you think yourself is not the most capable person in the partners, make someone else to be the core founder, and one has the final say. So that will save you a lot of time wasted in discussions and not to make a decision. Lesson 3 is get money early, right? If you can get angels' money, don't use your own money. Because when you use your own money, and when you face challenges, you put a lot of pressures on yourself. Because you're going to think about scenarios of one day I'm going to be poor and bankrupt, and what I'm going to do with my life and all those things. You're going to think about those things. But the thing is that the challenges always come your way. It's a daily exercise to deal with challenges. So if you're burning your own cash, you can have sober mind to really deal with those challenges. So get someone else's money. It could be angels' money. It could be, whatever money you can get. But get money early will make yourself much more comfortable in dealing with challenges. And someone will ask that, okay, if I had a really, really good idea, if I get money too early, then it will dilute the valuation of my company in the future. Don't think in that way. Always think to get a small piece in something that is big instead of control a large portion in something that is small. Think about if you're building Microsoft by having only 0.1%. It's much more valuable of having something that you can control 100% but never grows. Lesson 4 is be okay with changes. Your initial thing is usually wrong, as I said. Business model always pivots. People come and go. It's okay to be wrong. But as long as you don't give up, the startup is never over. So it's very important that you're okay with the changes all the time. You're cool with it. You go with the flow. You pivot as the direction goes. And you don't put enough pressure onto yourself. You don't corner yourself. It is hard enough to be an entrepreneur, to start a business. So don't spend any additional energy blaming or cornering yourself. Be okay with the changes. The lesson 5 is pace yourself. So a usual advice here is that before you're figuring out a business model, be as slow as you can. Spend time on one pilot, on one side. Just go back to basics. Figure out a business model, figure out a profit model, make sure you can make profits. And then when you figure it out, you expand as fast as you can. Having said that, when the market is crazy, like over the last 24 months, if you're very slow, you're probably going to miss the opportunity because your competitors are getting the money, they're going to expanding like crazy, and you're still dwelling here and trying to figure out what is right and wrong, you probably have no chance at all. So when a market is crazy, go crazy with them. Dance with the wolves. It's okay to do that. But beware that you are crazy as well. So don't take credit for yourself when it's just craziness going on. So on one hand, sober, okay, I'm doing this crazy thing because I want to beat my competitors. On the other hand, go crazy. So these two elements are very important to pace yourself. But when the market is sober, you have to be sober as well. So I think there's something very important in this, because a lot of the companies who go bankrupt, it's not because they don't have enough money to build a great business. It's because they take the value that comes from the creditness to put those credit onto themselves, think they have done something really great. But that's not the case. That's just a crazy market. So as a closing, I want to say that entrepreneurship is more than a career choice. It's a lifestyle choice, because it determines many things. It determines who you're going to work with. It determines who you're going to spend time day and night. It determines you're going to sacrifice a lot of your personal life and your personal choices. And it's an ongoing thing. I've seen many very rare people who choose to be on an entrepreneurial path and go back to take a corporate job. Because autonomy, because freedom is very addictive. It's like something when you take for once, you're going to take for your life. So when you pursue an entrepreneurship life, think about it as a lifestyle choice. And within a lifestyle, it's not only about work. It's about you need to take time to go to the gym. It's about you want to keep yourself healthy, not only mentally, not only physically, but mentally. Because that combined together is what we call entrepreneurship. It's not only about the work you do every day for like 12 hours or 15 hours. So that's my presentation for today, and I hope some of the people here will pursue their own entrepreneurial life and enjoy the ride. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening. I'll jump right into this, and I want to, I'll try to follow up on some of Ying's comments as well as echo some of the points that he made, because I think he was spot on with a lot of the commentary. And it's very nice to be back in Beloit. It's great to see professors and some former classmates as well. And my journey so far has, I think, Boon summed it up pretty succinctly. One thing that I forgot to even put in the materials that I submitted to the panel was that starting 2.5 years ago, I served as a founding member and the chief operating officer of another firm called Red Pulse Technologies. And I have since stopped doing that. But what the idea there was to take some of the expertise that I had built and some of the networks that we had built in Zebin Advisors and target a different client base. So we were very good at gathering financial service sector data for corporate clients. We thought, why not target that towards individual investors? So I made the decision to move back to the US earlier this year, and it was unrealistic to continue that role. So I don't really chalk it up as a personal success, but they still exist, and they're still active, and they're targeting a different client set. So about Zebin Advisors, the firm that I joined about 6 years ago, it's now an operational and strategic consulting firm that's active in Greater China and focuses on the financial services markets. We began in 2004, primarily providing research to the same clients that we were working with, but then expanded to do very tailored and very directed consulting projects that encompassed valuation, due diligence, strategy, all sorts of things that, broadly speaking, were within the financial services space. And so I've served in a lot of roles at the firm, and I can talk a little bit about that. So our clients are North American, European, Japanese, Korean, Hong Kong, and they come from brokerages, trusts, insurance companies, asset managers, institutional investors, some government organizations, and hedge funds. So I think we actually have a pretty good brand in Asia, in Hong Kong, for this sector, and we've done a good job of preserving that brand. One comment that I would echo from Ying's presentation was that we found that cash flow is very important, and I know that you hear that in accounting all the time. You have to have proper accounting and cash flow, but there's a huge difference between invoicing $1 million and actually earning $1 million. You cannot invoice your rent, or you can't pay your rent in invoices. So that was something that was very, very present for our early period, but we were lucky in that we haven't had to take any outside funding yet. The trick is, once you have your own revenue, it becomes much easier to go to an outside funder and prove that you're worth something. It's very hard to take a business plan and get funding for it. It's much easier to take a cash flow stream, put a valuation on that, and then take that to an outside investor. So I think that that's one thing that I would add to Ying's comments. So this I'm not quite sure what to make of. One of our analysts several months ago was doing some primary research elsewhere in Shanghai, and they noticed a funny sounding firm somewhere else in the building, so they went and took a picture of it. And that is indeed another company that has nothing to do with us, but appears similar. And so if you follow the dictum that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, I guess that's a positive. It also could be that we've joined the ranks of Prada and Louis Vuitton in the mainland, and now have our own knockoff brand. But that's not us, as far as I know. So, okay, so what I wanted to talk about, I'll step away from sort of my personal experience. Again, I think Ying covered quite a lot of the material, and talk about what areas we've looked at when we're doing research for our clients in the mainland financial system. And I think there is actually a lot of overlap between the work that we're doing and entrepreneur-driven growth. And so I'm going to assert, or the thesis that I'm going to argue, is that the common narrative is wrong. There's no significant lack of innovation or dynamism within the mainland economy. And there are some legal concerns and some institutional barriers, but I also feel that those are overblown as an explanation for why there is less entrepreneurship than you might otherwise expect. And in fact, it's a systematic under-financialization of the economy as a whole that's holding a lot of this potential back. Policymakers, on a positive note, policymakers do appear to recognize this, and they are taking steps and have been taking steps to reform. The risk, however, is that it's maybe too little and too late, or they won't be able to execute on all of the plans that they have. So yeah, we have the formal and informal institutions that we can talk about. So rule of law, legal precedents, and then financing instruments. So I'm of the opinion that China actually has a fairly defined system of rule of law. And you'll often hear entrepreneurs, especially foreign entrepreneurs, complaining that they go in, get burned, and then say there is no rule of law. But they went in assuming there was no rule of law and didn't bother establishing the appropriate contracts with their counterparties, didn't bother setting up their operations as they should have. And so it was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you're careful, it's not that bad compared to a lot of other developing markets. So my assertion is that the barrier is in the financing instruments. And globally speaking, when you are developing a corporate, a small, medium-sized enterprise, or even large, that you have several options for financing. You can spend your own money, you can grow through cash revenue, or you can do direct investments, private equity and venture capital, largely speaking, or go to the bond and equity markets. And so the problem in mainland China right now is that the security space is not as well developed as it should be. Most small and medium-sized enterprises, and especially startups, don't have much of a chance to issue bonds or issue equities to raise money for expansion. That leaves them with direct investments. And the mainland does have a relatively healthy private equity industry, but a lot of the private equity investments are what we call pre-IPO. And what that means is that it's not a traditional private equity model where they're coming in, buying a portion of the company, helping them restructure, helping them with their business model. What they're doing is coming in 2 years before an IPO and helping with marketing, and then waiting until the IPO and simply taking the difference. And that's valuable, but it's not necessarily wealth creating in the sense that we would expect direct investments to be. So taking a step back, the argument that I'm going to make is that high credit demand driven by growth expectations. So if you expect the market or the economy to grow at 7%, and you can finance at anything less than that, you should go for it. So there's a high amount of credit demand that has been unable to obtain loan financing due to controlled interest rates. This has been the case for the last 25 years, arguably. So if a small or medium-sized enterprise cannot access the direct investments, cannot access the securities investments, nor can it access a bank loan, it turns to non-bank financing or shadow banking. All that means is non-primary financings. And what ends up happening is that loans are offered as investment products to investors. So an institution will go to a bank, ask for a loan, be denied, but the bank will say, hey, we know a guy. And they'll set up a product, a legal product, that raises money from investors that then re-injects it back into the corporate. The major problems with this are there's something that we call a maturity mismatch. So what if the investors want to get out before the loan is due? That's one problem. The other is that there are unclear risk profiles. The bank hasn't bothered doing much diligence. The product issuer hasn't bothered doing much diligence. The investors may not even know what they're investing into. And so right now there's a very healthy market in non-bank financing. But I will argue that this crowds out other types of asset management products that could be more productive, while simultaneously forcing the small and medium enterprises that are utilizing these tools to pay above market rates. So when I say that China is under-financialized, what does that mean? So in the United States is a highly financialized economy. There's very little of the wealth held in cash deposits, and the U.S. has a very low savings rate. Consequently, it has a very large bond market, stock market, and asset management market as a percentage of total wealth. China's the inverse. It has a very large amount of deposits, a high savings rate, but not as strong of deployment of that into these systems. So that's the other part of the equation. The systems themselves are not offering the liquidity that would be needed to support a large amount of corporate growth. This is nothing new, however. So China is simply now experiencing a process that other markets have gone through in the past. So we can identify the United States having a period of rapid financialization during the 1980s, maybe the 1990s. The Eurozone had it in the 1990s, and arguably mainland China is only starting it over the last 5 years. And it's compressing that period into a much shorter time frame. So there will be growing pains. And one thing that I noticed when sort of coming through or thinking of this was that the periods of financialization tended to correspond with periods of pre-retirement demographic gluts. And so the theory, and I haven't really parsed this out yet, but the idea is that there is a significant demand for higher yielding investments among working age populations that plan to retire. And if you look at the United States in the 1980s, Europe in the 1990s, and mainland China right now, they have somewhat similar demographic profiles. And so they're financializing as a result of that. So the situation right now is that there's a lot of deposits. There are limited choices for investments. A lot of the investments that are being pushed in lieu of different types of professionally managed products are actually these sort of loan-linked products that, again, have the maturity mismatch problem and are not risk-priced. And as a result, a lot of money is showing up in other segments. It might be hard to read, but if you go from the top there, there's a lot of different types of, they're essentially just asset management platforms or asset management vehicles. And some of them have between 50 to 90% of the money that's put into them by investors reallocated as loans to corporates. So those should be loans in the banking system, but they're not because the banks are unable to change the interest rate that they're offering. So that's been a very big problem. Authorities have recognized this. They realize that this is a problem, and instead of cracking down on the shadow banking sector, if they did that, it would just show up somewhere else. The corporates would still want to expand. They would just go somewhere else. What they've done is they've tried to bring this into a more formal scheme, and that's been a positive. So the solutions, as I see them right now, are there needs to be a market-determined interest rate. And actually, that's been a pretty important development just 2 weeks ago. PBOC removed the cap that banks could charge on interest rates for any of their loans. There's been no movement yet, and there probably won't be for several years. But it's a major step forward in interest rate liberalization, and it's setting the stage to allow for a more market-determined interest rate, which will then hopefully allow banks to start providing more credit to these capital-starved industries. And simultaneously, hopefully, the securities and debt space grows as well. There needs to be a removal of government implicitly guaranteed protection for a lot of these products. So the investors that are putting money into this, sometimes they're aware that these are linked to loans for corporates. But up until now, in cases when defaults have occurred, when the companies themselves have been unable to repay the loan, the asset manager that is issuing the product has been able to cover the investors. And so far, the investor's assumption that they're protected has been absolutely correct. And then finally, there needs to be a secondary market for securitized products. So what I described of investors putting money into a pool and then investing into a corporate, that's not that different from an asset-backed security, which is a very large market in the United States. It doesn't exist in China to any degree as of yet, but it is in the works, and that will help mitigate a lot of the problems that are being seen. So that's the positive side. The negative side is that these reforms, they've sort of come and gone and started and stopped, and it's unclear whether or not the allocation right now is so misallocated that there's no way to bring it back to some sort of equilibrium. It's going to be a long process. Nobody knows what the size of the shadow banking sector is, and unwinding that is going to be very, very difficult. But this is an area that we've been dealing with a lot with our clients, and we found very interesting. So just to put a finer point on the scale of the problem, over the last several years, the amount of fixed asset investment, or the amount of credit growth, has been motivated not only by growth expectations for the economy, but also by the stimulus package that was launched in 2008 after the global financial crisis. So there was a rapid expansion in the money supply in China. And as a result, that money had to end up somewhere, so it mostly went into these types of products and corporate development. But the loan financing, the bottom bar on the left side there, was much lower than the amount of investment. And so that gap in the middle was made up somehow, and a lot of that is through the shadow banking or non-primary system. So why this matters for us, not only are we concerned about the wealth and well-being of the Chinese economy or the long-term growth prospects, but it's also true that the mainland economy is becoming much more integrated and correlated with the rest of the world, despite the fact that the Chinese stock markets are closed off from the rest of the world. And there's more capital that's going to and from. There's also more companies that rely on China as a major market, as well as more Chinese companies that rely on other markets for a significant portion of their revenues. So during this last market crash, it started in Shanghai, but it was very strongly felt elsewhere in the world. And that's something that hasn't really been appreciated up until this year. And so the solution, the way out of this is to continue reforms and continue engagement. But again, the risk is that it could be too little too late. I myself am optimistic, but that remains to be seen as to what further liberalization efforts will be taken.
President Scott Behrman, fellow students, Warren and Boon, thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. I have to apologize because I'm getting a cold. So I've been drinking heavily, but not beer. So I'll probably be coughing a little bit. But actually, they put me in the last place. Probably I get a few more minutes, right? So today, my talk will be basically an experience of all the startups that I've done throughout my life, and also serve to you as a practical guide that if you want to go into a startup company. Okay, who am I? So I was a class 8 in 1984 Beloit College graduate, and I went to Iowa State. Boon has, in fact, I did some brief introduction. I did a very brief postdoc at the Ames Lab, US DOE. And then my first job was at the Boston Advanced Technology. Interestingly, it's a startup company. I didn't own any shares, but I was the first scientist that was responsible for the first product, that from a concept to a final product. Later on, I got a job with BOC, a English company, 100-year-old English company, now part of the Lindy. Worked for 6 years there, and then I went to Intel. That completely changed my life from chemistry into a chip making guy, making computer chips. So then I returned back to China in the year of 2002, again working in the semiconductor industry in China. Intel wanted me to go back in Shanghai. So I went back and worked for 3 more years in the packaging and testing side. Again, it's part of the supply chain for semiconductor industry. I did have when the whole solar boom happened, I was put into applied material to do 1 year of solar. So that's an interesting experience. Then on the side, I teach a little bit at the Jiaotong University on the microelectronics. Interestingly, my major was chemistry. Now I'm completely immersed into the microelectronics. Okay. I have to spend a little bit of time to add it to my family ties with Beloit College. Scott is here, and I have some untold stories that I have to tell everyone. So now, how the hell my grandfather ended up with Beloit College? That was the year of 1914. He came here to study English literature. His age was 17 years old, and the first Chinese student for Beloit College. So the story back to, again, the ties between China and the United States, and in fact, Wisconsin. My great-grandfather was a president for a university, now it's called Jiaotong University, at the time it's called Nanyang College. He was a very open-minded person, a late Qing dynasty official, actually was responsible for the first business law that was set up in China. But he left politics and ended up in the university teaching for 14 years, actually a president for 14 years for Shanghai Jiaotong University. He, at the time that he hired a professor from University of Wisconsin named Professor Shelton. Shelton was responsible for building the electromechanics department in Jiaotong University, later become a very important part of the school's engineering department. So when Professor Shelton was in Shanghai in the early days, 1910, 1912, actually probably before that, he recommended CY10 to join Beloit College. In fact, CY actually had a chance to go to somewhere else, but he decided to come to Beloit. And his second year, I think one of the honors that he brought to the school was that he represented Beloit College and won the state oratorical contest. So as a young man from China, in those days, that's not an easy thing to do. So later on, he went to Columbia, and his grandmother also went to Columbia, and he was teaching English all his life. So another untold story was a CZ10. Probably Scott never knew that he existed. My grandfather's brother, younger brother, came to Beloit. In fact, landed here in 1920. There was letters from recommendation letters from my great-grandfather. Was the letters from the Tsinghua College. Tsinghua College was set up as a during the Box Rebellion, the indention. There was some scholarship set up, and he was that part of students that came to the United States. But he didn't pass his English. His English was poor. They wanted to send him back to high school to improve, and he ended up a transfer to University of Michigan. He later went to Harvard, and it was in economics, and he was professor for many different universities. The last one was Fudan University, and he is known as a written books. He was a well-known economist at the time. My father came here in 1947 to 49, chemistry, and I did my chemistry here, then also went to Iowa State, did a PChem. A lot of people hated PChem anyway. And then my son, Aaron, is he still here? Came here as the fourth generation. So here are some little interesting pictures. This is a picture that has my father. You can make a guess who is my father. My father is the only male in the family, and I have 3 aunts. And my grandmother, my grandfather, the one with dark glasses because he was blind, that was the CY10. Okay. Then here's the one I got from the archive. On the left is my grandfather, middle is my father, and on the right, the guy with long hair is me. Okay. Then here's another one. Who is this? This was Aaron Tang when he was very young boy. At the time, I received a card from Beloit College inviting him to be the next generation to join the college. Now, I don't need to show his picture right now that he's right over there. Okay. So now, go back to the real topic. General startup challenges. So real quick to walk this through. Number one is how to come up with a viable business plan. Then you're going to have to put a real strong mission team. In fact, when Ying was talking about this mission team, it's actually important, how the shareholding structures and everything is. I'm not going to jump into the details, but he has already, even in the dinner tables, and he said a lot of things that is correct. I share that. And also find the angel funds. Remember that I'm not a econ guy. I didn't go to MBA school. I'm always been in science. So a lot of these things that I have to learn from other people. And also how to develop innovative product with IP protection. The key word is IP protection. You don't want other people to copy your stuff. And how to succeed in round A financing or Series A financing. And in fact, for the first time I was doing it, it was horrible. I mean, I had to learn from, in fact, I would rather to know Ying at the time that I think I would be more successful. And how to overcome growth pain and expand. And last one is very important, how to sell your product. In fact, for most of the scientists, you want to build the greatest product, but you're not thinking about how to sell it until the very last moment when you had it. So that's too late. So you need to think about it from the very beginning. Key successful startup factors. The one is the business model. I wanted to start using the word innovation here because entrepreneurship, as Warren earlier put it, it's about owning a business. But you don't want to just own any business. You want to have a business that's going to be successful, meaning that you have something new, right? You have some new ideas, you have something to put into your company that would allow you to gain bigger market shares, let others to lose these shares. So innovation is very key. Team, you really have to have a shared vision and commitment. Okay. And then money, of course. My recommendation was to find a strategic investor, and in fact, that's the last one my investors did. So he basically started working on your next round financing, say help us on the market side. And then also understand the market from the very beginning. And very last is you really need the guts. Because not everyone really have the guts to go out and put your money in. In fact, Ying suggested not to put your money in. I put a little bit, not a lot. But the fact that you're not making money is you're already losing money, right? Because if I get a job from Intel, I get a big bucks. So you need the guts. So I did 3 startups. The very first one is my first job. That's actually a lucky thing for me to do. It was Boston Advanced Technologies. The owner is a professor from Boston University, Richard Clark. And I was responsible for making the first product.
Adjust this.
Okay. So it's very interesting that I was able to work from a concept to a product. In fact, the product is actually a gasoline analyzer using infrared spectroscopy to analyze what's in the gasoline, what's the octane of the gasoline. I'm not going to go to the technicals. But at the time, as a scientist, I have to doing illegal transportation of gasoline samples from Maryland testing center and drive all the way to Boston, and then with hundreds of bottles, small bottles of gasolines. Then working in the laboratories and develop the concept and patent the technology, and then eventually come out with the engineering samples and final mass production. And that product is still selling. The trade name is Petrospec, and you can find it from the internet. My second one was from 2010 and 2014. That was right after I worked for Applied Material on the solar. So I decided that at the age of 50, I give it one more shot. So I'm actually a pretty old man, by the way. So I give it one more shot to see if I can prove to myself, like my ancestors, to be successful in something that you wanted to do. So I started that one. That was a heck of an experience. I don't want to go into details, but a lot of things is like inside. There was a lesson learned from that. That was about shareholder structures. That was about people has different visions, has the different ideas in all the shareholders. So, but there's many lessons learned from that. That company still exists. It's finished the Series A, and it's actually doing quite successful. We make MEMS sensors, like biometric pressure sensors, senses the height. or something like that. This is probably the only kind in China. Right now, I'm just a minority shareholder, so I'm not going to go into more details on that one. But last year, I took over a subsidiary from that company, but basically it's the shell that has nothing to it, and in fact, it has losses. And I took it over completely, and I called it Zhangjiagang, but I use ZJG Lexvu, and I restart the business model, think of how to make money quickly. And the fact that I've been in the supply chain for China in the semiconductor industry, so I decided that packaging and testing is something will be very good business to get into. Keeping in mind that China in the early 2000s imports about 90% of computer chips. Right now, China still imports 85% of computer chips. If you add up all the dollar values that China imports the chips from overseas, that already exceed the oil import dollar amount. So that's how big that is. So I decided to get into that one. It was the idea started last year. The first half of this year, I finished round A. In fact, right now, the company is actually in a very good operation, which later on I will give you a forecast of how this company is doing and what I'm doing. Okay, so I will keep on running out of times, but Warren gave me just a little bit more time, okay? So a comparison of the startup financing is the United States and China. China is actually very different. Even though the Huang Ying said there was a crazy 18 months, but the crazy 18-month financing is mainly has to do with internet-based company, like P2P, O2O. But in the semiconductor industry, that's not the case. So when I did it, I relied a lot on the government fundings to start. But I'm not going to do it one by one, but you can see that this is just typical comparison. But Ying may have a different, may not agree to it, but that's how I see it. Okay. Oops, sorry. Is this correct? Let me see. Sorry. Okay. So the semiconductor supply chain, I just give you a real quick walkthrough. So basically, IC is integrated circuit. So your basically products start from a design cycle into a photomask mass production cycle. That's what we call the chip making. Silicon foundries like TSMC, SMIC, that they basically has a very complicated process that make all the chips on a wafer. And the wafer needs to be tested, that we call CP testing. Then after testing, you need to go through a packaging process. Then eventually after the packaged chip, it still need to be testing. So the red part, so what I got involved with was one is the design part. The first company was on the design, IC design. And the second one was on the CP testing, basically on the testing side. So this is the whole supply chain, which is in a real quick scan. The prospect of those companies, Shanghai Lexvu actually is still doing good. They had the first product. They have a little bit hard time selling it, mostly into the mobile phone business. But I'm not involved with this operation. The other one, we actually secured the necessary funds, but it's critical that I finish round B. Round B is, after I finish round B, and I think everything will be smooth sailing. So all the difficulties that I have encountered during my startup experiences, one is that China does not have a very well-established early-stage venture capital fundings. Again, when Ying was in the internet business, that's a little bit different. China has always been a lot of money put in the PE side before IPOs, pre-IPOs. It's a huge amount of money that's out there. But the early stage ones are not so easy to find. But I actually was successful in getting some government fundings, including China Academy of Science. The other problem is Chinese young people tends to be influenced by parents and friends. That they want them to get a private, a foreign firm job because it tends to pay very well, has a good corporate culture, but instead of taking risk and working in startups. So finding talented people is a problem. Also, lack of hands-on experiences and innovative thinking. That's based on my experience. that Chinese current education system has some problems. If you look at the Chinese students that go to Iowa State, for example, their hands-on skills are not good. But even though they get very high scores in the test. Rising labor cost, high interest rate, unwillingness of banks to lend money to non-government companies. Keep in mind that government companies, they chase them to want to give you money, but not the non-government. So on Lexvu, that the one in ZJG, Zhangjiagang, I'm just going to say Chinese. So we finished round A. We're actually profitable this year, okay? And we basically wipe out all the losses in the past year. We will be making pretty good money next year, and we're still expecting to have the OTC listing. OTC is the 新三板, it's a new China sort of like a NASDAQ, but it's on the much lower levels. Lesson learned. Analyze the market and make sure you can sell first. More cutting-edge product tends to have higher market risk, because in China you can make the best thing, but the other guys just don't want to use it. I can buy it from somewhere else, and why should I use yours? Right? Be careful in selecting your partners. Let the team be co-owners. Stock options. So basically, let them share the same visions that you have. Also, be careful in selecting your investors. Don't jump to startup if you don't have a strong heart. That's really important, because that's really not for weak-heart people. Key takeaways, my last slide. I still have 2 minutes. Okay. Entrepreneurship alone cannot ensure successful startup. Entrepreneurship meaning I want to do business. You can run a mom, papa shop in the ice cream shop, something. But you have to be doing a little bit different than other people. Because the pie is this big. A lot of people's in there. But you want to grab a much bigger share of that. You want to take away shares from other people, which meaning you need to be more innovative. You need to think about new ideas, how to differentiate yourself from others. Innovation must be incorporated into business plan to ensure a successful startup. By the way, I taught Innovation 101 in Intel University. So Intel actually has a school. They teach internal engineers. Intel, a company of such age and high technology, is always paranoid. Even for today, that the company may eventually be folded and the stock will go down the toilet. So even a matured company need to have a constant innovation, not even talk about startups. So innovation can be of many types. Product innovation, Apple, right? Apple 5, 6C, 6S, whatever. So you see the product innovation, a process innovation, reducing your cost, have a high yield for the product, even financial innovation. So there are positive part of financial innovation, but there's also, you heard about 2008 and 2009, we have a big crash. That was part of financial innovation. So can have negative consequences. Business model innovations. In fact, a lot of these Internet Plus companies are business model innovations, branding innovations. And the last one is entrepreneurship is really not for everyone. And we cannot have, every one of us have a company. It's only some people that have this good business sense, and they can have this strong heart. They're willing to take the risk and have higher returns and can be in that business. So that was my last slide. I don't know if I ran out of time or not.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our presenters. And we're now going to ask Professor Huang to come up and give his comments in response to them.
Yeah, thank you, Warren. I feel that I have a huge disadvantage after Eddie's presentation. I don't have a grandfather who came here as came to Beloit College. In fact, as I come to think of it, I don't have a grandfather who went to any college. probably not even high school. And so it is a great honor to be here and to get to know Eddie. And MIT actually has a program with Shanghai Jiao Tong University. And for many years, I was on the review committee of that program. And we look forward to more collaborations with Shanghai Jiao Tong University. So tomorrow, we're going to hear from Lauren Brand, who is a prominent historian, economic historian on China. And I think what I want to say is that if you look at Chinese history, Lauren, please correct me if I'm wrong. If you look at Chinese history, this is a country that has pioneered in many, many technologies and inventions. We have a grant to create a data set on all Chinese historical inventions. It is far more than the 4 big inventions that everybody knows about. So China has that, and China also had quite vibrant merchant class. So both of those elements existed, and yet, and this is something that economic historian and others have always, Joseph Needham, for example, have always wondered about China. Why didn't Industrial Revolution take place in China first? So I think it is important to emphasize that, coming back to the theme of the lecture series, the prosperity of nation, well-being of the nation, having innovations and having entrepreneurial development and dynamics are probably necessary conditions, but they may not be sufficient conditions. It may take other things for that to be translated into economic growth and economic development. What are those things? I don't really know, but we can speculate that, so this is related to a number of comments that the 3 presenters already talked about: the development of financial market, the rule of law, the intellectual property rights protection. Right? So I think it's fairly clear that China historically had entrepreneurial development, had technological development, but it didn't have these institutional mechanisms to make sure that the property will be developed, the intellectual inventions will be respected. So looking forward, I believe that it is important to look at wonderful things that our 3 presenters have been talking about, but it's also important to think about these larger institutional conditions and requirements for converting entrepreneurship into economic development. The other thing I want to say, and this is probably related to Tony's presentation, he made a, I think, very interesting distinction between institutions such as rule of law and finance. I think he's right. On the other hand, it's also important to think about institutions like rule of law, contract, as related to finance. And contract law, a loan is a financial contract, and equity arrangement is a contract. And so these 2 things are probably not as separate as sometimes believed. For example, in China now, there's a phenomenon of not high-tech entrepreneurs, but low-tech entrepreneurs, private sector entrepreneurs, essentially shirking their debt obligations to the financial system. When GDP is slowing down, they just pack up and leave in order to get themselves out of the debt obligations. One reason for that is the lack of clarity of the debt obligations. Because Chinese financial system lends money, supports state sector, so a lot of the loan capital has gone to the state sector. And the state sector is already over-investing. They don't really use that capital productively. So what they do is they on-lend to the private sector. When the GDP is growing, that arrangement works wonders because it solves two problems at the same time. It solves the political and ideological bias problem because the SOE is really the party to the debt transaction, and it solves the financing problem faced by the private sector. When the GDP growth is slowing down, you have a huge problem. The private sector doesn't, the private firms don't generate enough revenue to service the debt, and yet their name is not on the debt contract. And as we know, in any of these informal arrangements, precisely because the arrangement is informal, you cannot sue the party for lack of payment because the entire arrangement has been under the table and informal. So informal contracts cannot be enforced, and I believe that's going to present lots of problems for the Chinese financial system. And it's on that, in that regard, it is very important to emphasize that many of the high-tech firms in China are funded, are backed in ways that are similar to the US high-tech firms, the way that US high-tech firms are backed. They are backed by Western VC capital. If you think about Baidu, if you think about Alibaba, Alibaba received a huge amount of financing from Yahoo. If you think about Tencent, even Lenovo, which is a company that many people think about as a state-owned company, if you look at the history of this company carefully, it raised its initial capital not in China, but in Hong Kong. Right? So essentially, the dynamic entrepreneurial success stories emerging out of China have very little to do with the Chinese financial system. So it is very important to remember that the Chinese open door policy, we typically think about Chinese open door policy absorbing trade and foreign direct investment as a vehicle for foreign companies to operate in China. I think the biggest benefit of the Chinese open door policy is to allow foreign financing to fund domestic high-tech startup companies in China. The other thing I want to mention is the very important role of Hong Kong, the role of Hong Kong in the Chinese economy. If you look at many of the property rights and where the company is registered, many of these high-tech firms are actually registered in Hong Kong. Right? So essentially the best arrangement is one that has the Western property rights protection in Hong Kong, rule of law and all of that, and it has the availability of the domestic market opportunities. That arrangement has worked out very well for some of these companies. The last thing I want to say is, even though I'm not an entrepreneur, so they shouldn't listen to me, and I have worked with entrepreneurial companies in China, both as a professor at MIT as well as an advisor to a number of the entrepreneurial companies. So I'm going to just spend maybe 3 minutes talking about my impressions of the entrepreneurial companies in China and my impression of entrepreneurial companies in the United States. I'm serving on the board of an MIT-related company, and if you look at this company, it was founded in 2001. It has invested $100 million in R&D, and it is now finally ready to go to market. The lead time is enormous, and the VC capital is there, but it is a very several presenters have talked about that it is easy in China to get late-stage capital than early-stage capital. Even the early-stage capital in China is not as patient as the early-stage capital in the United States, right? So I just want to add another difference between China and the United States. I agree with them that it's very difficult to get early-stage capital in China. To the extent you can get it, it's actually a very quick kind of, I also serve on the Chinese board, and they do things very, very quickly. So maybe there are technologies that you can do very, very quickly, but I would say many of the true technological breakthroughs take huge amount of time to go from the laboratory to the market. And through an activity that I founded in 2008 called China Lab, we have worked with over 150 Chinese entrepreneurial companies in China. What I can say is, if we look at the companies that we work with in 2008, 2009, 2010, and look at the companies that we work with today, there's a world of difference between the companies then and the companies now. And that evolution is also telling us a story about where the Chinese economy is going. So the companies that we work with in 2008 and 2009, almost all of them were about finding, identifying overseas market opportunities. So they came to us and they said, could you help us identify Japanese market or Korean market or the US market? Today we have a more diverse portfolio of companies now. Definitely there are companies that are still export-oriented, but we have many, many companies that are concerned about their organizational capacity to deliver performance. Before, management was not really the thing that they thought was important. What's important to them was to find the market. Once I have the market, I'm okay. Right? Today, maybe reflecting that the market is becoming more competitive, then they are turning inward. They look at their organizational capabilities and they say, those capabilities are not matched with the fierce competition on the marketplace. So human resource type of projects are very, very common. Technology-themed projects are very, very common. Devising KPIs, key performance indicators, to systematize management is very, very important. So there's a view that in the age of entrepreneurship, you don't need management. That is true in terms of starting a enterprise, but it's not true when you scale and grow the enterprise. You still need management. So so maybe there's still room for business school, and so for those of you thinking about applying to a business school, apply to MIT Sloan School of Management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Huang. And I think Boon has a few comments he would like to share. Boon, we have you Skyped in again. Can you hear me, Boon? I think we're having problems here. Can you hear me, Boon? No, we seem to. I'm also texting with Boon, so.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm talking assuming that you can hear me. I just have two basic comments. The first one is that through the panel's input, it is clear that there has been major distortion in the allocation of financial resources to the private sector. Hopefully the liberalization that is now ongoing from last week in the banking system's interest rates will solve the problem. Okay. And 1 second, I have to switch off my streaming. The second comment I have is what was raised by Ying just now. about his adventure. And this was seconded by Eddie, which is that there is a major barrier to entrepreneurs for their longevity in business life also depends on their health. Unfortunately for me, when I was at Beloit, I never took part in any physical exercise in the gym or in any sports. Fortunately for me, I changed my habit at MIT Sloan right after I started my graduate work there. I'm proud to say that actually I finished running a full marathon at the Manila International Marathon under 4 hours and 40 minutes. Well, my point is, Beloit College realizes we have a deficiency in our student center, come fitness center, come a sports center. And that's the reason why the board, with the able leadership by our president, we are working very hard to do fundraising for the powerhouse. And I hope that will become a reality soon, because I truly believe that Beloit education on campus cannot be complete without a proper student center and without great facility that we now do not have in the area of fitness. Thank you.
Thank you, Boon. So we'll now entertain some questions for all of our speakers. And we also will have a microphone for the people who wish to ask questions. You'll notice that you're not being amplified into the room. The microphone is to pick you up for the video streaming that's taking place. So do we have someone with a question? You can sit in front. So do we have a question? Yes.
I guess I'll wait for all the panelists seated. Well, so I have two related questions, and it's coming after Professor Huang's commenting on that it is China's lack of institutions which led to the failure in converting the entrepreneurship to economic development. So my first question is about what are the obstacles for Chinese proper institutions for that. And my second related question is regarding to some of our panelists talking about, like Ying talking about the merge and of the number one and number two, and we often talk about when China's entrepreneurship, we don't see any new ideas coming in. We just copy paste what the Western or other countries have. Like you mentioned about, okay, China's Groupon or China's blah blah, all the models that we borrow from the West. So I wonder, how do you think the lack of, like, say, protection for the property right plays a role in this, and how do you think the market now, like the merge of number one and number two, harm to other small-sized businesses, and how this phenomenon can be indeed a way good or bad for the future of Chinese entrepreneurship? Thank you.
I'll jump in with the answer to the second question. I don't have a lot to say about the first. And I think that it's perhaps a mischaracterization to say that, or I would think it's a mischaracterization to say that the opinion is there is copycatting. And I think there's actually a lot of domestic innovation that is occurring that's ahead of what's going on in the US. So the taxi hailing apps, Kuaidi, Didi, those were in development before Uber was around. And so you could argue Uber copied them. I don't think that was really the case, but Jingdong, I would argue, has a better business model than Amazon. We talked about that in one of the classes today. And so I think that there are examples of business models that have come out of the mainland that aren't purely copycats, that have been quite successful. And the merger towards, the going to a single large entity rather than having a broader field, that's usually the sign of a mature market. There tends to be sort of with anything that has a network effect, a very strong winner-take-all outcome. And in the absence of regulation, that typically occurs. So that actually could be a sign of a healthy market. And then a slight aside would be that I believe there's some literature that suggests that lack of protection for some types of rights could actually lead to more development. I don't know how I don't have any research to back that up, but it encourages more experimentation. And if there's too much, regulation in place that blocks experimentation, that can also be a barrier to different types of arrangements of organization or ideas.
I added to that just a few sentences. So the Shanghai Lexvu, when we start, this is about 4 years into now, we have about 100 plus patents already applied. So the internet, the IP protection, the old ideas about Chinese only knows how to copy things. That's not quite true. I think China is becoming more and more placing a lot more and more emphasis on the intellectual property protections. So maybe Ying, you can add a few more.
Yeah, I think Tony and Eddie has answered the second question very well. So I want to develop on your question a little bit to talk about another interesting question, is how to think about a monopoly in tech-driven business. Does it matter? Because if you look at not only China but also U.S., in every one of the industry sectors, you only got one. You have one Google, which is absolutely dominant. You have one Microsoft. You get one Apple. You get one Facebook, right? So I think that's one of the fundamental characters of tech-driven business, is that connectivity is the core of the business model. Networking effect will drive all the resources and users to just one platform, because that's the most efficient thing to do, and that comes to the question that you naturally lead to monopoly, right? So how do we think about that? Is that an issue, or does it kill innovation or not? And my response to that is that we don't have to worry too much about monopoly in the tech-driven business. The reason being that the tech market is so dynamic that the whole market landscape is changing every 6 months. And you always have disruptions from the peripheral. Peripheral meaning that your competition is usually not from your own market. It's usually from some places you never even noticed about. So by worrying about your own competition is actually missing additional new opportunities in the wrong way. I'll just give a few examples. We know Nokia is probably nothing right now, but there's one interesting comment that the Nokia CEO made just a while back, that we pretty much fall into nothing without doing anything wrong. But that's precisely what they have been doing wrong, is that they're not venturesome enough to actually think about the bigger pictures of, we're not really a telecommunication company, we're actually a computer company, and we're an internet company. That's not the way they think about things. They think about things as, all the smartphone things is only an add-on of the telecommunication device they're making. And that's the issue. We see similar trends in China. It's like Tencent, it's an instant messenger company that is growing really big. They started by one simple app. And probably they themselves haven't thought about that one day they are the core competitor of the state-owned enterprises, China Unicom, China Telecom, China Mobile in China, because they are actually undercutting the fundamental business models of those guys. So that's what's happening. So I think we should be pretty comfortable with monopoly in those markets, because those are the guys, the big guys, are the ones who are actually worried the most. Think about Facebook. If they didn't buy Instagram a few years back, they're nothing now, because Instagram is really taking the lead of the social networks. So that's my little comment here.
Hi, I'm John Rappin, Department of Political Science. I appreciate having you into our joint class earlier this afternoon. Going on Professor Huang's comment about the lack of rule of law being a problem in China. There have been some people arrested in China. Chinese-American businesswoman most recently, Fan Gillis, and there was a British businessman before. They were arrested because they were doing due diligence for investment companies, and they were looking at Chinese firms as, I guess, would be, not being an expert, as part of your job, right? If you're going to recommend a company for people to invest in, you need to do due diligence and find out about their profit and loss and their financial statements. And they were accused of leaking state secrets because it was either a state-owned company or a state-favored company that had guanxi with the elite, and got them arrested for really making things more transparent, which is what I think you would want in your line of work, right? Have you run into that problem? Was a lack of rule of law hurting foreigners who are consulting about proper investments in China?
We've been very careful in the lines of business that we engage in. So what they're doing is direct corporate analysis or direct equity analysis. So that's sort of the audit work that large professional services firms like PwC, KPMG would do. And that's absolutely necessary. So if you're going to sell a portion of your company, you want some accountant, external accountant, to back that up. And that is a pretty big problem. The solution, well, I think that's more of a political problem than a market problem, because I would say that there have been very deliberate, both by our efforts, but also I know other groups that have avoided that space. And that this might be backtracking on some of the earlier comments, but that is a political problem. Now, why that exists, I think is, or I would argue, is there's probably an interest group in the party that wants to maintain the status quo because they favor those industries or want to protect the company, the local darling, and we're able to do this. There are other more recent cases. More close to the industry was a foreign hedge fund, Man Investment. Their CEO was arrested. She's on meditation for the last 2 months. We don't know what that means. Not arrested, but she's been investigated. She's meditating for 2 months. And we don't know what that means. But yeah, she it's not that negative. I'm sure she'll go home. But it's there is a rule of law, but the spotty enforcement of it is probably the greater problem. And that's I think a political economy question rather than a market question. But they are very intertwined, and I don't have an easy answer to it.
My name is Dennis. My question goes to Ying. In mentioning about entrepreneurship, you didn't seem to mention about the company culture. One reason I'm saying this is because Jeff Bezos, the founder and CEO of Amazon, recently was in a skirmishes that he has a very harsh company culture. And what do you think? I mean, you as a founder, you spend so much time building your company. Do you think that employees have the same responsibility?
I don't think that employee has the same responsibility as the founder, because the founder owns the majority shares, and the founder is the one who declares bankruptcy if the company doesn't do well, and founder takes the most risk. To go back to the culture question, I think as a startup, the founder defines the culture, because when the company is so early on, you pretty much actually make all the decisions, and you hire all the people that you want them to be around you. So the founder has a huge influence, at least on the early stage, on the culture of the company. And I won't say there's a good culture or a bad culture about what is the right way to build a company culture, because you only attract the type of people that are attracted to you. And there's a self-reinforcing power going on that will make a company distinctive from each other. So I think at early stage, probably prior to Series B or even Series C, I think the company should just focus on getting the things right, and worry less about culture, because culture will come when the founder has been pretty clear about what he wants and how he wants to get it. So I think I hope that answers your question.
I added just a little bit because I actually work in different kind of companies. I worked in startup at the very first job, and then I worked for very large corporations like Intel. And my team came from very large companies, overseas, like the Intel or SanDisk. So my company, I think, at least when I started, I want to make sure that we will retain some of the goodness of this Western companies' corporate cultures. Because I actually have a bias. I think those Asian companies, they have, I didn't work there, but the way, SMIC was one of the examples. So their corporate culture has a lot of these internal infightings and different kind of things happen. I mean, it's just many of this even in the news. But in Intel, that has a very distinctive culture that if you don't fit in that Intel structure, then you just automatically get out yourself. So we really emphasize on the culture part, even when it started. So right now, the Zhangjiagang operation that I'm running, I don't really, we have 3 shifts, 24 hours operation. I don't have to really pay a lot of attention. Basically, everybody knows what exactly their responsibilities are, what they need to do. But then also back to the Chinese state-owned firms. I would think that myself, I would never really want to work there. I think Ying may agree with me. I never worked there, but I have friends. My father used to be the North China pharmaceutical industry, and that was built in the 1950s. There was a lot of horror stories about the company's problems, but now it's a publicly listed company. So, and a lot of politics. But it's quite different. There's a cultural difference between the Chinese corporate culture and the Chinese government state-owned business culture, and also the Western firm, especially like from Europe or United States. So.
Well, we've been going for an hour and 45, hour and 50 minutes. We can't impose too much more on our guests, so please join me in thanking them. And if you have additional questions, you might come down and chat with them now. Thank you very much.